Zuri Thompson prided herself on being invisible. To the elite she delivered to, she was just a black leather jacket and a motorcycle helmet. But when a GPS glitch sends her through the wrong service door of a high-security penthouse, she doesn't just deliver food, she stumbles into a death warrant. Pinned against the broad, tattooed chest of Lee Do-Hyuk, the city's most feared mafia boss, Zuri realizes she has exactly 10 minutes to prove she isn't a spy, or she'll become the next body his men have to bury. Sets the neon-drenched, high-tension atmosphere of a high-security penthouse. It establishes Zuri's, alert and caught off guard, state, a dark-skinned woman in a black leather jacket whose shock is mixed with curiosity, and Lee Do-Hyuk's calm, intense dominance as he traps her against his chest to silence a witness. The air in the penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the ozone of a looming storm. Zuri's hand remained pressed against Lee Do-Hyuk's chest, her palm absorbing the steady, terrifyingly calm rhythm of his heart. She was a delivery rider. She was used to aggressive drivers and dark alleys, but this was different. This was a man who moved like a predator in a world where there were no police, only consequences. Do-Hyuk didn't move. His gaze remained locked on hers, intense and unbothered, as if the shocked crowd and the red neon glow of the room had faded into a blurred background. "You took the wrong turn, little bird," he murmured, his voice a low vibration that Zuri felt in her bones. His grip on her arm was firm, not quite hurting, but asserting a dominance that made her breath hitch. Zuri's eyes, trained by years of navigating chaotic city streets, darted downward. In the space between them, resting on a polished mahogany side table, lay a burner phone. Its screen flickered to life with a silent notification. She shouldn't have looked. She knew the rules of the city: stay in your lane, keep your head down, and never, ever look at what doesn't belong to you. But the notification was a string of coordinates followed by a single, chilling sentence in a messaging app she recognized from the darker corners of the web. "The site is ready. Midnight. We bury the bodies and the boss together." The breath left Zuri's lungs in a sharp hiss. She looked back up at Do-Hyuk, the boss the message was surely referring to. To her left, Marcus, Do-Hyuk's second-in-command, was stepping forward with a practiced, oily smile, reaching for the phone. "Just a wrong delivery, boss," Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'll handle the girl, she's seen enough." The shock in Zuri's expression shifted, sharpening into the alert focus that kept her alive on the road. She felt the weight of the secret like a physical heat. If she stayed silent, she could walk out that door, get on her bike, and be 3 miles away before the first shot was fired. She could go back to being a ghost. But she looked at the man holding her, the man whose own partners were currently measuring him for a grave. There was a strange honesty in his coldness, a stark contrast to the betrayal shimmering in Marcus's eyes. Her fingers curled against his black t-shirt, bunching the fabric. The resistance in her posture melted into a desperate, tactical urgency. "Paragraph 17, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the pulse of the room, echoing the instinct of a woman who knew a trap when she saw one. "Your phone, Mr. Lee, don't let him touch it, unless you've already picked out your favorite suit to be buried in." The room went deathly silent. The unbothered mask on Do-Hyuk's face didn't break, but his eyes darkened, turning into 2 chips of black ice. The 10-minute timer had just begun. The silence that followed was heavy, a suffocating vacuum that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. Zuri could feel the heat radiating from Do-Hyuk's chest, the hard muscle beneath his shirt unyielding as she remained pinned against him. Every eye in the penthouse was now a weapon, pointed directly at her. Marcus's hand, still hovering inches from the burner phone, froze in midair. The oily smile didn't just fade, it curdled, turning into a mask of cold, murderous intent. "Excuse me." Marcus's voice was no longer silk, it was gravel. He looked at Do-Hyuk, trying to reclaim the narrative. "Boss, she's clearly high on something, or maybe she's working for the competition trying to sow discord. I'll take her out back and find out who sent her." Do-Hyuk didn't look at Marcus. He didn't even look at the phone. His steady, terrifying gaze remained anchored on Zuri. He shifted his weight, his close stance becoming even more intimate, a dominant shadow that loomed over her. He reached out, his tattooed hand moving slowly, almost gently, until his thumb brushed against the pulse point on her neck. He was measuring her fear, checking the rhythm of her honesty. "You're a delivery girl, Zuri," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. You see a lot of things. You see the grime in the alleys and the grease on the bags, but you don't see into the hearts of my men. Why would you risk your life for a lie? Zuri didn't flinch. The shock that had initially paralyzed her had distilled into a sharp, crystalline clarity. She knew this brand of man. She'd seen them in the background of her deliveries for years, the ones who thought they were gods until the floorboards rotted beneath them. I'm not risking it for a lie, she said, her voice ringing out with a sudden, defiant strength that startled even her. I'm risking it because I recognize that messaging app. It's the one the ghosts use, the street-level hitters who don't care about honor, only the payout. And the payout on that screen, it isn't for a delivery, it's for a funeral. She looked past the ink on Do-Hyuk's neck, straight into the eyes of the man who held the city in his grip. Your guy is lying to you. He's not handling a mistake, he's coordinating a burial. And if you let him touch that phone, the last thing you'll see isn't the sunset, it'll be the muzzle flash of the men waiting for you at midnight. The air turned frigid. Marcus made a sudden, desperate lunging movement toward the mahogany table, but he was too late. Without taking his eyes off Zuri, Do-Hyuk's free hand shot out, his fingers locking around Marcus's wrist with the sound of a dry branch snapping. The unbothered Titan had finally been provoked. The 10-minute timer wasn't just ticking anymore. It was screaming. The sound of Marcus's wrist snapping was a sickening crack that punctuated the sudden, absolute stillness of the room. A muffled cry of agony escaped him, but it was cut short as Do-Hyuk's grip tightened, anchoring him in place like a broken toy. The Mafia boss still hadn't looked away from Zuri. His eyes remained fixed on hers, searching for the flicker of a lie, a tremor of hesitation, or the hidden agenda of a rival. 10 minutes, Do-Hyuk repeated, the words like cold stones falling into a deep well. He glanced at the digital clock on the wall, then back at the girl in the leather jacket. In 10 minutes, the private elevator at the end of that hall will open. My personal security detail, men I have paid and trusted for a decade, will step out to escort me to the docks. He leaned in closer, his scent of sandalwood and cold steel enveloping her. The extreme closeness was no longer just a threat, it was an interrogation of her soul. Zuri could feel the heat of his skin through her clothes, a stark contrast to the icy professionalism of the room. If you are lying, Zuri Thompson, I will hand you to Marcus, and he will spend the rest of his short life making you regret ever walking through that door. If you are right, I am standing in a room full of ghosts. Zuri swallowed hard, her hand still resting against his chest, feeling the terrifyingly steady thrum of his heart. I don't know your world, Mr. Lee, she whispered, her voice raw but steady. But I know the streets. I know that when a hit is called, the messengers don't use the front door. They use the invisible ones. The burner phone, the coordinates, the midnight deadline, it's all a script. And right now, you're playing the lead role in a tragedy. Marcus let out a ragged, desperate breath. Boss, please, she's a nobody. A delivery girl from the gutter. You're going to trust her over 20 years of loyalty. Do-Hyuk's gaze finally shifted to Marcus, and for a second, the mask of unbothered calm slipped to reveal a glimpse of the demon beneath. Loyalty is a shadow, Marcus. It disappears when the lights go out. He turned his attention back to the burner phone on the table. With his free hand, he didn't pick it up. Instead, he gestured for Zuri to do it. Unlock it, he commanded. If the coordinates lead to the docks, you live for the next 9 minutes. If they lead anywhere else, this conversation ends now. Zuri's fingers trembled as she reached for the device. Her alert senses were screaming. She knew that the moment she swiped that screen, she wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was an accomplice, a strategist, and a target. She swiped, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her wide, dark eyes. The map blossomed into view, a pulsing red dot centered exactly on Pier 47. Pier 47, she breathed. The kill zone. Do-Hyuk's jaw tightened. He didn't wait for Marcus to speak. He didn't wait for an explanation. He looked at the elevator doors at the end of the hall. The light above them flickered. The ascent had begun. 8 minutes left, Do-Hyuk said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal silk. He looked at Zuri, a new spark of curiosity in his eyes. Since you've ruined my evening plans, delivery girl, perhaps you'd like to show me those invisible doors you mentioned. We aren't taking the elevator. The heavy steel doors of the elevator groaned, the mechanical whirring of its ascent sounding like a guillotine blade being drawn back. Do-Hyuk didn't hesitate. He grabbed the burner phone with his free hand and, with a brutal shove, sent Marcus sprawling into the center of the room. Stay there, Do-Hyuk commanded, his voice vibrating with a cold finality that suggested Marcus was already a ghost. He turned to Zuri, his hand finding the small of her back not to push, but to guide her into his orbit. "Lead," he said. Zuri's alert instincts took over. She didn't head for the grand foyer or the marble staircase. She swung toward the service corridor, a narrow, dimly lit vein of the building that smelled of industrial floor cleaner and stale steam. Behind them, the chime of the elevator echoed through the penthouse, a death knell for the man they were leaving behind. They burst through the double doors of the industrial kitchen. The staff froze, copper pans suspended in midair, as the city's most feared man and a delivery girl in a scuffed leather jacket streaked past the prep stations. The red neon of the dining room was replaced by the harsh, flickering, fluorescent hum of the service world. "Through the walk-in," Zuri breathed, her boots skidding on the damp tiles. "The freezer?" Do-Hyuk questioned, his brow furrowing as he ducked under a low-hanging rack of ladles. "There's a loading hatch in the back for the ice deliveries," she explained, her voice tight with the adrenaline of the fast and electric pace. "It bypasses the lobby cameras. It's how we get the orders up when the service elevator is jammed." She kicked open the heavy insulated door, a cloud of frozen vapor swirling around them like a shroud. Zuri scrambled over crates of frozen poultry, reaching for a rusted iron lever near the floor. With a grunt of effort, she heaved it upward. A square of humid night air flooded the freezing room as a small, waist-high hatch swung outward. Do-Hyuk watched her, his steady gaze taking in the way she navigated the grime and the shadows with the grace of a queen in her own castle. He was a man of fortresses and armored cars. He had forgotten that the city belonged to those who moved through its cracks. "It's a 4-foot drop to the garbage bay," Zuri said, looking back at him, her dark skin glowing under the dim emergency light. "Your suit is going to get ruined." Do-Hyuk let out a short, dry laugh, a sound that held no humor, only a grim appreciation for the stakes. He shed his tailored jacket, tossing it into the darkness of the freezer, and gripped the edge of the hatch. "I've bled in better clothes than these, Zuri. Move." They dropped into the narrow alleyway, the air thick with the scent of rain and wet pavement. Above them, the penthouse windows glowed with a silent, deceptive peace. Zuri didn't stop to look back. She pulled her helmet from where it was clipped to her belt and whistled. 10 feet away, tucked behind a dumpster, her matte black motorcycle sat waiting, the only exit the traitors hadn't accounted for. The matte black motorcycle roared to life, a low-frequency growl that echoed through the narrow alleyway. Do-Hyuk sat behind Zuri, his powerful frame a heavy, stabilizing weight against her back. As they tore through the city's industrial fringe, the wind whipped Zuri's hair against her helmet, but her mind remained as sharp as a blade. She didn't take him to a safe house or a police station. She took him to the gray zone, a tucked-away shipping container yard where the city's independent couriers exchanged information. They pulled into a secluded bay lit by a single, buzzing sodium lamp. Zuri killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Do-Hyuk dismounted with a lethal grace, his fitted black t-shirt stretched tight across his chest, his tattoos looking like war paint under the yellow light. He pulled out the burner phone Zuri had salvaged and made a single call. He didn't speak, he simply entered a code. Within minutes, 3 black SUVs ghosted into the yard, their headlights cutting through the gloom. A group of men stepped out, Do-Hyuk's frighteningly efficient, loyalist team, led by a woman with a face as scarred as a battlefield. They didn't ask questions. They bowed once, took the burner phone, and began working on a portable server array in the back of the lead vehicle. Zuri stood by her bike, her black leather jacket gleaming. She felt the shock of the evening settling into a cold, hard resolve. She watched as the team's lead analyst looked up, her expression grim. "The girl was right, boss," the analyst reported, her voice like sandpaper. "The coordinates at Pier 47 weren't for a meeting. They've bypassed your primary encryption. Marcus didn't just leak the location, he sold the satellite tracking codes for your entire convoy. The hit wasn't just on you, it was a total wipeout of the inner circle." Do-Hyuk turned toward Zuri. The calm, intense dominance was still there, but it was now tempered with something else, a profound, dangerous respect. He stepped into her space, his close stance forcing her to look up. "You saw a digital signature that my own security missed," he said, his voice a low vibration. "A delivery girl from the gutter just saved the lives of every man in this convoy." The betrayal was no longer a theory, it was a verified map of war. The invisible world Zuri navigated every day had just provided the only lens through which Do-Hyuk could see his enemies. "The timer hasn't stopped," Zuri reminded him, her hand instinctively finding the grip of her motorcycle. "They still think you're heading for the docks. They're waiting for a ghost." Do-Hyuk's gaze darkened, his eyes turning into two chips of black ice. "Then we shouldn't keep them waiting," he murmured, his thumb brushing the pulse point on her neck once more. "But we aren't going to the docks. We're going to the source." Inside the cramped, humming interior of the lead SUV, the air was sharp with the smell of scorched electronics and cold rain. Do-Hyuk's team moved with a mechanical, lethal precision, but they were staring at a digital wall. The traitors hadn't just compromised the encryption, they had ghosted their movements through the city's main arteries, using the high-end security networks to mask their trail. "They're using the standard routes," Zuri said, her voice cutting through the frantic clicking of keyboards. She stepped closer to the primary monitor, her black leather jacket creaking in the silence. The alert focus in her eyes had shifted. She wasn't looking at the screen as a victim anymore, she was looking at it like a navigator. Do-Hyuk leaned over her shoulder, his proximity a constant, steady heat. "The standard routes are how we control the city," he noted, his voice a low vibration. "That's why you're losing," Zuri countered, her finger tracing a path on the digital map that avoided every major boulevard and highway. "Marcus knows your protocols. He knows which intersections have your cameras and which plazas your men hold. He's counting on you to retreat to your fortresses." She began to tap on the screen, highlighting a series of gray zones. The forgotten industrial corridors, the underground delivery tunnels beneath the shopping districts, and the narrow service alleys that were invisible to GPS. "This is the Ghost Network. It's how we deliver. Packages when the city is on lockdown for a parade or a riot. No cameras, no sensors, no official record." The lead analyst paused, looking at Zuri with a newfound wariness. "Those tunnels are for cargo, not armored convoys. We can't get the SUVs through there." "Exactly," Zuri said, turning to look directly at Do-Hyuk. The forbidden attraction between them pulsed in the narrow space, but it was now fueled by a shared, tactical intelligence. "You don't need a convoy. You need to be small. You need to be fast. If you go through the gray zones on 2 wheels, you can be at the traitors' headquarters before they even realize you've left the alley." Do-Hyuk's calm, intense gaze swept over the map, his mind calculating the risk. For the first time in his life, he was being asked to abandon his armor and trust the invisible world of a girl who had walked through the wrong door. "You're mapping a war, Zuri," he murmured, his hand resting on the back of her chair, his tattoos stark against the white light of the monitors. "I'm mapping a win," she corrected. "Marcus thinks he's playing chess. I'm telling you the board is bigger than he thinks." The unbothered Mafia boss looked at his scarred lead analyst and gave a single, sharp nod. The transition was complete. Zuri was no longer the witness to his destruction. She was the architect of his survival. "The bike," Do-Hyuk commanded, his eyes locking onto Zuri's. "Show me the way through your world." The roar of the motorcycle was a low, rhythmic thrumming in the damp night air as they descended into the city's subterranean arteries. Zuri leaned into the curves of the service tunnels, her black leather jacket grazing the concrete walls, while Do-Hyuk held her with a grip that was no longer just about stability. It was a silent pact. Above them, the city's grid was a trap of high-definition cameras and idling hit squads, but down here, in the invisible network, they were ghosts moving through the machine. Zuri reached up and tapped her Bluetooth headset, activating a frequency the Mafia's high-tech scanners would never think to monitor. The open-channel ridernet used by the city's thousands of couriers. "Package in transit," she murmured into the mic, her voice steady. "I need eyes on the backdoor routes. Anyone seeing black sedans idling in the blind spots near the Emerson district." Static hissed, then a chorus of voices. The tired, the fast, and the forgotten began to chirp back. To the world, they were just delivery riders weaving through traffic, but tonight, they were Zuri's reconnaissance fleet. "Rider 6 here. Got 2 suits in a nondescript SUV parked behind the old textile mill. They're checking the clock every 30 seconds. A voice crackled. "Rider 12. I've got a tail on a courier who just dropped a burner phone at a safe house on 4th and Main. It's Marcus's personal driver." Zuri glanced at the heads-up display she had jury-rigged onto her handlebars. The gray zones she had mapped were lighting up with real-time data. Every time a traitor moved, a delivery rider was there, appearing to do nothing more than drop off a bag of cold takeout or a stack of documents. They were tracking the Mafia's elite, using the very people the elite never deigned to look at. "They're consolidating at the Central Exchange," Zuri shouted over the wind, her eyes narrowing behind her visor. "Marcus isn't fleeing. He's heading there to wipe the server logs and finalize the transfer of your assets. He thinks he's invisible because he's behind a firewall, but he's forgotten about the service entrance." Do-Hyuk leaned forward, his chin near her shoulder, his calm, intense energy radiating a terrifying heat. "He's forgotten that the walls have ears and the streets have eyes." The counterstrike was silent and surgical. As they emerged from a steaming vent behind the exchange building, Zuri's network had already cleared the path. The ghosts Marcus had hired were looking for an armored convoy on the main road. They never saw the matte black bike slip into the shadows of the loading dock. Zuri killed the engine, the silence of the alleyway feeling like a held breath. She looked at Do-Hyuk, the forbidden attraction between them flickering like a short-circuiting neon sign. They were at the heart of the betrayal, and for the first time in his life, the boss wasn't leading the charge. He was following the girl who knew the way in. 3 minutes, Zuri whispered, checking her watch. "Before the elevator Marcus is on reaches the penthouse. Are you ready to reclaim your empire?" Do-Hyuk didn't answer with words. He reached out, his tattooed hand cupping the side of her helmet, his thumb grazing the dark skin of her jaw. In that look, the unbothered Titan admitted that the delivery girl had done more than save his life. She had changed the way he saw the world. The heavy silence of the exchange building's server room was broken only by the rhythmic hum of cooling fans and the frantic clicking of Marcus's keyboard. He was a man possessed, his face illuminated by the harsh blue light of the monitors as he attempted to delete the digital trail of his treason. He was so focused on the screen that he didn't hear the service door click shut or the soft, heavy thud of Zuri's boots on the raised floor. "It's a long drop from the penthouse, Marcus," Do-Hyuk's voice rang out, cold and resonant as a funeral bell. Marcus spun around, his face draining of color until it matched the white light of the servers. He looked at Do-Hyuk, then at Zuri, the delivery girl in the scuffed leather jacket who had somehow dismantled a 20-year conspiracy in a single night. "How?" he wheezed, the word escaping him like a dying breath. "You looked at the board, Marcus," Zuri said, stepping out of the shadows, her eyes reflecting the neon glow of the hardware. "But you forgot to look at the streets. You forgot that the people you ignore are the ones who see everything." As Do-Hyuk's loyalists moved in to secure the traitor, the adrenaline that had fueled Zuri for the last 3 hours began to ebb, replaced by a profound, clarity-inducing weight. Outside, the sun was beginning to bleed over the city's skyline, a pale gray light that signaled the start of a new day and the end of her shift. She could walk away now. She could return to the simple life, to the invisibility of the delivery routes and the safety of the shadows. She could go back to being a ghost. She looked at her hands, still vibrating slightly from the bike's engine, and then at Do-Hyuk. He was standing amidst the ruins of his empire's betrayal, his calm, intense gaze fixed solely on her. He wasn't looking at her as a witness or a tool. He was looking at her as an equal. "The bike is outside," Zuri said, her voice dropping to a low, determined silk. "I could go back to the depot. I could tell them the GPS glitched and I got lost." Do-Hyuk stepped toward her, his proximity closing the distance until the air between them was electric with forbidden attraction. He reached out, his tattooed hand cupping her jaw, his thumb tracing the line of her lip with a dangerous tenderness. "You could," he murmured, "but the city looks different now, doesn't it? You've seen the gray, Zuri. You've seen how the world actually moves." Zuri realized then that safe had started to feel like drowning. The simple life was a cage she had built out of fear. She didn't want to be invisible anymore. She wanted to be the one who saw. She leaned into his touch, her hand finding the familiar, hard heat of his chest. The dangerous combination of her street smarts and his power wasn't a mistake. It was a destiny. "I'm not lost, Mr. Lee," she whispered, her gaze locking onto his with a fierce, newfound pride. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The skyline of the city glittered like a spilled box of diamonds, but from the vantage point of the penthouse balcony, the view was no longer a distant, untouchable dream. A year had passed since the night a GPS glitch had rewritten the laws of the underworld. Zuri stood by the railing, the the wind tugging at the edges of a sleek, custom-fitted leather jacket that cost more than her old motorcycle. She wasn't carrying a thermal food bag anymore. She was holding a tablet displaying the real-time logistics of an empire that had been rebuilt in her image. Beside her, Lee Do-Hyuk leaned against the stone balustrade, his presence as calm and intense as ever. The silver at his temples had caught the moonlight, and the tattoos on his forearms were partially obscured by the rolled-up sleeves of a shirt Zuri had picked out for him. They weren't just a man and his advisor. They were a partnership of power that had become the city's most whispered-about legend. "The Emerson district is quiet tonight," Do-Hyuk noted, his voice a low vibration that still sent a familiar spark of attraction through her. "The last of the old guard has folded. They've realized that the invisible network is faster than their lobbyists." Zuri smiled, a sharp, confident expression that held no trace of the girl who had once trembled in the service corridor. "They spent decades building walls, Lee. They never realized that the people who move through the cracks are the ones who actually own the foundation." In the past 12 months, Zuri had transformed the Mafia's bloated, vulnerable infrastructure into a streamlined machine. She had integrated her RiderNet into their security protocols, turning every delivery rider and street-level worker into a sensory node for their organization. They didn't rule through fear alone. They ruled through an information advantage that was absolute. She had become his legal and tactical strategist, the dark-skinned woman in leather who sat at the right hand of the boss, translating the language of the streets into the language of power. Do-Hyuk turned toward her, his steady gaze softening with a rare, private warmth. He reached out, his hand covering hers on the railing. The extreme closeness that had once been a threat was now their greatest strength. "You saved my life that night, Zuri, but you did more than that. You gave me a vision I didn't know I was missing." "I told you," she whispered, leaning into his strength. "I didn't want the simple life. I wanted a life that mattered." As the city hummed below them, a sea of neon and shadows, the delivery girl and the Mafia boss stood together. They were partners in every sense, bound by a shared history of betrayal and a future built on the gray zones they had mastered. The world still didn't see them coming, and that was exactly how they liked it. 1. The transition from the shadows of the streets to the pinnacle of the city's skyline was finally complete. Zuri sat at the head of a sleek, black glass conference table in a room that had once belonged to Marcus, but now breathed with a different kind of power. Across from her sat 3 of the city's most prominent logistics CEOs, men who, a year ago, wouldn't have spared a glance for a delivery girl. Now, they sat in stifling silence, sweating under Zuri's steady, alert gaze. Lee Do-Hyuk stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silent, dominant shadow in the background. He remained unbothered, his muscular arms crossed over his chest, his presence making it clear that while he owned the building, Zuri owned the room. "Your current security protocols are based on an illusion of control," Zuri said, her voice a cool, authoritative silk. She didn't need to raise it. She had the frighteningly efficient data of the streets behind her. She tapped her tablet, and the RiderNet map of the city blossomed across the wall-sized monitors in a web of pulsing neon lines. "You monitor the highways and the gated entrances, but you've left the service tunnels and the gray zones wide open. My people have been moving through your secure facilities for 6 months without a single sensor being tripped. We know what you ship, who you pay, and exactly where your vulnerabilities lie." One of the CEOs cleared his throat, his face pale in the blue light of the display. "And what is it you're proposing, Ms. Thompson? A partnership?" "I'm not proposing anything," Zuri replied, leaning back in her chair with a sharp, confident smile that held the edge of a blade. "I'm implementing the new protocol. From now on, the invisible people you've ignored are the ones you report to. We aren't just delivering packages anymore. We're delivering the law of the streets. You will integrate our RiderNet into your logistics, or you will find your supply chains paralyzed by the very ghosts you refuse to see." Do-Hyuk walked over to the table, his hand finding the back of Zuri's chair. He looked down at her with a look of profound, dangerous pride. The forbidden attraction had matured into a lethal, unbreakable partnership. He turned his gaze to the men at the table, his eyes turning into chips of black ice. "Listen to her carefully," Do-Hyuk murmured, his voice a low vibration that commanded absolute submission. "In this city, she's the only one who can see the traps before they close, and if you aren't with her, you're in our way." Zuri looked up at Do-Hyuk, her hand finding his on the back of the chair. The delivery girl who had walked through the wrong door was gone, replaced by the city's most formidable strategist. They had turned a moment of public tension into a private empire. As the sun rose over their territory, Zuri realized that she had finally found the one thing she'd been searching for in the dark, a place where she was no longer invisible, but essential. They were the architects of the gray, and the city was finally listening.